He's 62 years old. House is paid off. Retirement account has 7 figures in it, and he's standing in the grocery store aisle, staring at 2 bags of coffee. One is $11. One is $14. He stands there for almost 2 minutes, not because he can't afford the $14 bag. He can. He knows he can. But something in his brain won't let him just put it in the cart and move on. He puts back the expensive one, walks to the register, and then feels vaguely bad about himself for the rest of the afternoon. I've watched this happen more times than I can count. Not with people who are struggling, with people who, by every financial measure, have already won. And here's what makes it stranger. That same man checks his Fidelity app every morning around 9:30. Some mornings, the balance is down a few $1,000s, and his chest gets tight, not because he needs that money today. Not even this year. Just because seeing the number go down feels like a threat. This is the paradox of quiet wealth. The more you've saved, the more you have to lose, and the more your brain treats every dollar like it might be the last one standing between you and disaster. If you recognize that feeling, I have good news and bad news. The good news is, mathematically, you're doing better than roughly 90% of people your age. The bad news is, math alone won't fix the anxiety. Your brain isn't running a spreadsheet. It's running a survival program that took 40 years to build. What follows are 9 signs that you're actually in a stronger position than you think, and more importantly, why knowing that still isn't enough and what to do about the gap. Let's start with the floor, not the ceiling, not the dream number, the floor. The number that means you can't be forced into a bad decision. Sign number 1 is this: your fixed monthly expenses, your housing, utilities, groceries, insurance, are covered by income that has nothing to do with the stock market. Social Security, a pension, an annuity, something that shows up every month regardless of what the S&P 500 did last Tuesday. The Social Security Administration reported in 2026 that the average monthly benefit sits around $1,976. If your guaranteed income clears that number, and it covers most of your non-negotiable bills, you are already operating with a level of baseline security that most Americans your age do not have. Your portfolio becomes something you draw from on your own terms, not something you're forced to liquidate when the timing is terrible. That distinction matters more than people realize. It's not just comfort, it's structural protection. Sign number 2 is that your housing costs are under control. That doesn't necessarily mean your house is fully paid off, though that's a strong position. It means your mortgage or rent isn't eating 40% of your monthly cash flow. When housing is stable and predictable, the rest of your financial life becomes manageable. When it isn't, everything else is fragile. I've seen people with impressive investment accounts who couldn't sleep at night because their housing situation was a pressure point. And I've seen people with modest savings who felt genuinely at ease because that one cost was locked in and predictable. The number on the account matters less than the stability underneath it. Sign number 3 is that you carry no high-interest debt, no credit card balances rolling over month to month, no personal loans with double-digit interest rates. This one doesn't get enough credit. People focus on the investment side of retirement, which makes sense, but debt at 20% or 24% APR is a slow leak in the hull. Every dollar you're paying in interest is a dollar that can't compound. If you walk into your 60s without that anchor, you've given yourself something that doesn't show up on any balance sheet: optionality. Optionality means you can say no to things. No to the job you hate. No to working an extra 2 years because you feel financially trapped. No to liquidating investments at the wrong time just to cover a bill. Here's the mini math on what that actually means. Say you're carrying $15,000 in credit card debt at 22% interest. That's roughly $3,300 a year in interest charges, money going out the door and producing nothing. Over 5 years, that's more than $16,000 gone, and that's before you account for what that money could have grown into inside a retirement account. Eliminating that debt before retirement isn't just good hygiene. It changes the math of every year that follows. Now, if you're nodding at all three of these, you've built a genuine foundation. Fixed income covers your floor. Housing is stable. Debt isn't bleeding you. That's not nothing. That's actually where a significant portion of Americans your age are not. But a solid foundation is just the beginning. The people who are truly ahead of the curve in their 60s aren't just surviving. They're using a set of tax advantages that most people either don't know about or don't act on in time. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The years between 55 and 65 are often the highest earning years of a person's career. Promotions have compounded. Raises have stacked. The kids, in most cases, are out of the house. The mortgage is shrinking or gone. This window is the most powerful wealth building period most people will ever have. And a surprising number of people spend it upgrading their lifestyle instead of their balance sheet. Sign number 4 is that you're maximizing your retirement contributions during these peak earning years. And if you're between 60 and 63 years old in 2026, the IRS has something specific for you that most people aren't using. It's called the Super Catch-Up Contribution. For most people over 50, the standard catch-up limit for a 401k is an additional $7,500 per year on top of the base limit. But for people aged 60 through 63, the Secure 2.0 Act allows a catch-up contribution of up to $11,250 instead. That's $11,250 in additional pre-tax dollars going into your account, on top of the standard $23,500 base limit, for a total of $34,750 in 2026. Let's put that into real numbers. If you're 61 in a strong earning year and you maximize that super catch-up for just 3 years, you're looking at potentially $33,750 in additional contributions alone, before any market growth, before any employer match. At even a moderate return, the compounding on those final contributions can be significant. This window closes. At 64, you drop back to the standard catch-up rate, which means right now, for people in that specific age band, this is the most tax-advantaged moment of their financial life. Missing it isn't a minor oversight. It's leaving a meaningful amount of money on the table. Sign number 5 is that you have a cash buffer, a real one, not your investment account, not a line of credit. Actual liquid cash or short-term bonds sitting outside your portfolio, available without penalty, available without selling anything. Most financial conversations skip past this and go straight to asset allocation. But the buffer is what keeps your long-term investments intact when something goes sideways. A car that needs replacing, a roof, a medical bill that insurance only partially covers. Without the buffer, those moments become forced sales. With the buffer, they're just inconveniences. Sign number 6 is that your spending didn't keep pace with your income. I want to say this carefully, because this isn't about living like a monk. It's about the gap. I've seen people go through exactly this. Consistent promotions through their late 50s, meaningful salary increases, and instead of letting the lifestyle expand to match, they held the line. Same house, same car, maybe one upgrade but nothing dramatic. and they funneled the difference into their accounts. I remember thinking, watching that happen, that the restraint looked almost uncomfortable from the outside. And then I watched what it produced over 5 years. The gap between what you earn and what you spend is the engine. Everything else, the investment strategy, the tax optimization, works better when that engine is running. Lifestyle creep is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as a slightly nicer hotel, a lease on a car that's a tier above what you actually need, a subscription here, a renovation there. None of it feels like a decision. It just feels like progress. But each of those choices narrows the gap, and the gap is the whole game. If you've managed to keep that gap open through your peak earning years, you've done something genuinely difficult. Not because the math is complicated, because the social pressure to spend more when you make more is relentless, and most people don't resist it. You've built the foundation. You've taken advantage of the tax structure. You've kept the engine running. But here's what I want to ask you directly. What happens if the market drops 20% in the first year of your retirement? Not as a hypothetical, as a test. Let's run a scenario. You're 62. You've just retired, or you're about to. The timing feels right. The numbers look good. And then, within the first 12 months, the market drops 20%. Not a prediction, just a stress test. Because it has happened before, and it will happen again. In 2022, the S&P 500 dropped roughly 18% over the course of the year. People who retired that January and needed to pull from their portfolios to cover living expenses had no choice but to sell shares at depressed prices. That's not just a bad year. That's a permanent reduction in the base that everything else compounds from. This is what financial planners call sequence of returns risk. It's not about average returns over 30 years. It's about what happens in the first 3 to 5 years when your portfolio is at its largest and you've just switched from contributing to withdrawing. A loss early in retirement does more damage than the same loss 15 years in. The math is unforgiving on this one. Sign number 7 is that you have enough liquid reserves to survive that first window without touching your investments. The Federal Reserve's 2025 report on the economic well-being of U.S. households found that 37% of Americans couldn't cover an unexpected $400 expense from savings. That number is jarring on its own. But here's why it matters for you specifically. If you're sitting on 12 to 24 months of living expenses in cash or short-term bonds, you are in a completely different category than most of your peers. That reserve isn't dead money. It's insurance against the worst timing in retirement. Here's the scenario split. Say your neighbor retires the same month you do. Same age, similar portfolio size. Market drops 20% in year 1. Your neighbor has no cash buffer. To cover $5,000 a month in expenses, they sell shares at the bottom. They lock in those losses permanently. When the market recovers 2 years later, they've recovered on fewer shares than they started with. The damage doesn't undo itself. You draw from your cash reserve instead. Your portfolio sits through the downturn untouched. When the market comes back, you're recovering on a full position. You restock the cash buffer gradually as things stabilize. Same starting point. Completely different outcomes at 75. One path builds back. The other one doesn't fully recover. That's not a small difference. Over a 20 or 25-year retirement, that divergence can be the difference between financial comfort and quietly running low in your mid-70s. Which is exactly when healthcare costs tend to accelerate. I've been close to situations where people didn't have this buffer and had to make decisions they never anticipated. Selling a property at the wrong time. taking Social Security earlier than planned to avoid liquidating the portfolio. Each of those decisions has a cost that echoes forward. The buffer doesn't eliminate risk. Nothing does. But it buys you time, and in retirement, time is the one resource that lets your investments do what they're designed to do. If you have that reserve sitting there, and you've been wondering whether it's just cash dragging down your returns, it isn't. It's the reason your long-term portfolio gets to stay long-term. So if you've made it through all 7 signs so far, the math is genuinely in your favor. Guaranteed income covers your floor. No high-interest debt. Peak earning years maximized. Lifestyle held steady. Cash buffer in place. By most objective measures, you're in the top tier of retirement preparedness in this country. And yet, if that's true, why does it still not feel like enough? Why are so many people in exactly this position still lying awake at 3 in the morning, running the numbers again? That's not a math problem. That's something else entirely. Let me describe something and tell me if it sounds familiar. You have real money saved, not comfortable money, actual, meaningful money. Enough that, on paper, you could upgrade your seat on a long flight without thinking twice. Enough to write a check for a grandchild's tuition and not feel it. Enough that a $300 dinner shouldn't require a conversation. But you don't do those things. Or you do them, and then feel vaguely guilty afterward. Like you broke a rule that nobody wrote down but everybody somehow agreed to follow. That guilt has a name. It's called saver's guilt, and it's more common among high net worth retirees than most people admit. Sign number 8 is recognizing that you have the assets, but you've lost the permission to spend them. This isn't a character flaw. It's a wiring problem. For roughly 40 years, your brain was trained to do one thing with extra money: save it. Every raise, every bonus, every year-end windfall got filtered through that same response. Don't spend it. Protect it. Grow it. That instinct built the account you have today. It served you well. But the phase has changed. The accumulation phase is over. You're supposed to be in the decumulation phase now, which is a clinical way of saying, this is the part where you actually use it. And your brain hasn't gotten the update. The switch from save to spending doesn't happen automatically. For a lot of people, it doesn't happen at all. I've watched people with $2 million in their accounts debate whether to replace a 10-year-old appliance. Not because they couldn't afford it, because spending felt like losing. What's underneath that isn't really about the appliance or the plane ticket or the dinner. It's what I'd call catastrophe anxiety. The deep, quiet fear that somewhere out there is a single event, a medical crisis, a market collapse, a long-term care situation, that will unravel everything. And if that event is coming, every dollar you spend today is one less dollar standing between you and that outcome. The anxiety isn't irrational. Those risks are real. But the anxiety doesn't scale to the actual probability. It treats every possible disaster as equally likely and equally imminent, which means it keeps you in permanent defense mode even when the math says you've already won. I can sit here and show you projections. Run the Monte Carlo simulations. Demonstrate that even with a conservative withdrawal rate, your money outlasts any reasonable life expectancy with room to spare. And I have done that in various forms for a long time. But I can tell you honestly, I cannot fix the anxiety with a spreadsheet. That part is yours to work through. What I can give you is a structural workaround that takes the decision out of your hands. It's called the bucket strategy, and the version that matters most here is the permission bucket. Here's how it works. You separate your money into clear categories. The first bucket is your security money. Fixed income, cash reserves, the floor we talked about in signs 1 through 3. That money is untouchable except for its designated purpose. Knowing it exists and knowing what it covers is what allows the rest of the system to function. The second bucket is your discretionary fund. This is the money you are not allowed to protect. If you designate $2,000 a month as your spending money, the rule is simple. Spend it, not invest it, not roll it over. Spend it. On the trip, on the dinner, on the grandkids, on whatever makes the month feel like it was worth having. The psychological effect of a designated spending account is real. When the money already has a job, using it doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like the system working correctly. The goal isn't to spend recklessly. The goal is to stop treating enjoyment as a threat. You spent 40 years building this. The last thing it should do is sit there while you feel guilty about a $14 bag of coffee. There is one more sign, and it's the one that most people keep putting off. Not because it's complicated, because it forces a conversation nobody wants to have. Sign number 9 is that you have an estate plan in place, a real one, not a folder somewhere with a will you printed off the internet in 2009. An actual, current, legally sound set of documents that tells the people you love exactly what to do and gives them the legal authority to do it. At minimum, that means 3 things. A will that clearly designates who receives your assets and who is responsible for carrying out those wishes. A financial power of attorney that names someone you trust to manage your money if you become unable to. And a healthcare power of attorney, sometimes called a healthcare proxy, that designates who makes medical decisions on your behalf if you can't make them yourself. Without those documents, the decisions don't disappear. They just get handed to a probate court. Probate is the legal process by which a court validates your estate and oversees the distribution of your assets when there's no clear legal instruction in place. It is slow. It is public. It can take anywhere from several months to a few years, depending on the complexity of the estate and the state you live in. And it costs money, typically 3% to 7% of the total estate value in legal and court fees. That comes directly out of what you intended to leave behind. More than the cost, it removes control from your family at exactly the moment when they are least equipped to deal with bureaucracy. I've been close to situations where the absence of a simple document turned a difficult time into a genuinely painful and expensive one. Adult children disagreeing over intentions that were never written down. Assets frozen while the court sorted it out. A process that took the better part of 2 years. None of that is inevitable. A straightforward estate plan, done properly with an estate attorney, typically costs a few hundred to a couple of $1,000, depending on complexity. Measured against the size of the estate most people reading this have built, that cost is negligible. Measured against what probate can consume, it's one of the highest return decisions you can make. The trade-off is direct. If you don't decide who manages your assets and your health care, the court will decide for you. That process will cost your family time, money, and clarity at the worst possible moment. Peace of mind is not a soft concept. It has a structure, and this is part of it. So let's bring it back to that man in the grocery store. 62 years old, house paid off, 7 figures in the account. Staring at a $14 bag of coffee like it's a decision that actually matters. Here's what's true about him. He won the math. He built the floor, cleared the debt, maximized the window, kept the lifestyle in check, built the buffer, and protected the people he loves. By every objective measure, he did the work. The only thing left is convincing himself that it's okay to live inside the life he built. If you got through all 9 signs today and found yourself nodding, that's not a coincidence. You made real decisions over a long time that most people didn't make. That's worth acknowledging. The battle that remains isn't in your portfolio. It's in the story you're still telling yourself about money. The one that says saving is safe and spending is risk. That story kept you disciplined for 40 years. It also might be the thing that keeps you from actually enjoying the next 20. You don't have to spend recklessly. You just have to stop treating your own life as a line item to be minimized. Drop a number in the comments. How many of the 9 signs do you recognize in yourself? And if this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribe. There's more where this came from.